me and you, for the profit of the very few. Mamas, I can't tell you much, you've heard it all before. But please don't send your babies off to war. I got brothers all around, they used to gun and climb us down. Now the enemy they died to find is standing in the grocery line. How can you feel but confused when you know that you've been used? Your brother's blown to keep them calm for the man they bought the weapons from. That is, I can't tell you much you ain't heard before. Please don't send your babies off to war.
Hello, my name is Richard Johnson, and with me is David Anderson and Rick Davis. Our subject is post-traumatic stress disorder and its effects. I'd like to take a few minutes initially to talk a little bit about the history of post-traumatic stress disorder. In 1980, post-traumatic stress disorder was included into the diagnostic manual for psychiatry and psychology. But PTSD has been with us for as long as trauma has been occurring, and certainly as long as wars have gone on. Post-traumatic stress disorder has been called the Vietnam Veterans Syndrome, and wrongfully so. As I said, every war that we've ever had has produced thousands of soldiers, veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, and the civilian population has been affected by that since the beginning of time. Post-traumatic stress disorder essentially is a dysfunctional response to a traumatic event, an abnormally intense event in which the person is not able to adjust to, and develops a series or syndrome of dysfunctional behavior in response to that trauma. In 1978, in response to a growing need for Vietnam veterans to talk about their experiences and deal with the traumas that they experienced in the highly intense war in Vietnam, the Disabled American Veterans Association established some storefront counseling centers throughout the United States in an effort to reach those men who needed the help, who would not go into the more formal Veterans Administration hospitals. During that first year, they were so successful in assisting quite a few veterans that Congress insisted that the Veterans Administration take over the program and fund it, since it was for veterans and they were the main service organization for the United States government. During 1979, late 1979, the first vet centers were established. Here in Montana, the Billings Vet Center was one of the first half-dozen vet centers in the United States to be established. Since then, we've built 196 vet centers across the country. The one in Missoula, Montana, being added about 6 years ago, 5.5, 6 years ago, to that list. Those vet centers deal with readjustment counseling problems and primarily with post-traumatic stress disorder. This evening, these two gentlemen with me are going to discuss how post-traumatic stress disorder, the response, dysfunctional response to a severe trauma in their lives, has affected them. As they talk about that, I would like to remind you that this is a disorder not just of veterans, that anybody who has been severely traumatized and has not had the opportunity shortly after the trauma to process that and to deal with it successfully emotionally is likely to run into similar emotional problems.
Hi, my name is Rick Davis, and I'm 40 years old. In 1967, I was a sophomore at Hellgate High School here in town, and things kind of fell apart at home, and I ended up joining the military at 17 years old, and went to boot camp in San Diego, California. Went through all my basic training there, my ITR, and ended up in Vietnam in September 1968, and I was with an artillery battery. It was on a DMZ, and anyway, on February 25th of 1969, our battery that was on LZ Russell was just 1,000 meters off the DMZ, got overrun at 4 o'clock in the morning, and we suffered some very heavy casualties. Out of my battery of 49 guys, there was only 7 guys that made it. Total guys off the hill was around 152 medevacs the next day. This, I believe that at that very time I quit growing emotionally, quit feeling anything, and I believe that it's affected me ever since. And I've been divorced one time. I'm currently separated from my second wife, and it looks like that's going to end in divorce too. But it's a real hard situation. Turned out to be a real hard person to live with, and God, I gotta think.
Tell us about some of the symptoms.
Some of my symptoms, I have a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. I have a real startle response to any loud noises or quick motions or whatever. What else?
Sleep disturbance?
I got a lot of sleep disturbance. I have to take sleeping pills to sleep, and I take other medication for anxiety and depression. And it's real tough. I'm going through an extremely tough time right now. It's going to be my second divorce, and I finally have looked at it as time for me to do something about it. And I'm currently scheduled to go to Palo Alto, California on January 16th to go inpatient down there.
Thank you, Rick. Dave, would you like to speak now?
Yeah, my name is Dave Anderson. I'm from the Missoula area here since 1961. In 1966, I graduated from Sentinel High School here and immediately went down at the age of 17 and attempted to enlist in the Marine Corps. I went because I felt a real sense of need to do my patriotic duty to serve my country. I needed my parents' permission to accomplish that feat, and after a couple of weeks of work, I managed to talk them into the fact that I in fact did need to go into the Marines, which I did. In 1967, I entered the country of Vietnam as a infantryman, a grunt, if you will. I joined a unit in the Northern I Corps of Vietnam that had just been decimated. All but 9 of the kids in the platoon that I joined had been killed the 2 previous days before I joined their unit. I joined them alone. What I mean by that is I didn't come with anyone that I had trained with stateside or anyone that I knew. They were all strangers when I first joined them, which leaves you in kind of an awkward position to start with. The very first night I joined my unit in country, which was Mike Company of the 3rd Battalion, 26th Marines, I was immediately put on in the field on a listening post, which was quite a jump from civilized America into being out in the jungle on your own with 2 other men, waiting to listen in on people that are coming to attempt to kill you. Difficult concept for me to grasp at first. As time went on, realization took over, and as I saw more deaths and was involved in more killing of people, I slowly shut down. I didn't realize it at the time. I did what I had to do to survive like everyone else did under the situations. But I had to erect a wall in order to deal with the daily chaos that went on around me. It was the only way that I could survive emotionally. I dealt with Vietnam actually quite well. It's after coming home that I really felt the effects of what I'd had to see and go through and do. As soon as I came home, I basically isolated myself by moving into the mountains around here and spending my time and making my living in the mountains because I couldn't stand to be near people any longer. I'd learned a bitter lesson in Vietnam that being around people was basically a good way to be in pain all the time. I spent about 10 or 15 years after coming home from Vietnam dealing with depressions, anger, suicide the best way that I could, which generally meant either by getting drugs or comatosing on, or drinking a lot of booze or going comatose on drugs so that I could sleep at night. I basically avoided any feelings connected with Vietnam for many, many years by going into isolation and allowing myself to not confront anything in life. By erecting a wall inside myself to survive all of this, I also no longer allowed any positive input to enter my life. I didn't deal very well with people, which is a cause for the 2 divorces that I've been through in my life. Both of my wives stated at the end of our relationships that they were both afraid of me physically and that they were just sick and tired of seeing me always on the edge and always having to deal with my anger. In 1985, through the culmination of my last divorce, I finally got to a point in life where I had to confront reality, I suppose, and I found the vet center. Since then, they've led me through quite a process of learning. I don't know that I could say that they've solved any problems for me. I'm not sure there is a solution yet. But they've given me a lot of insight. They've been there when I needed someone to talk to, which is probably one of the most important things. And they've helped me to understand what this is and that I'm not strange or different, really. I am quite a normal result of where I've been and what I've been through. That and accessing me to other veterans, which I'd also isolated from. I got to meet a lot of other fellows at the vet centers through the groups and just sitting around the office talking. That's helped me to realize that there's a lot of other people out there that are desperately struggling to put their lives back together, wondering what's wrong with them. And being able to understand that I'm not alone in that has helped me a great deal along the way too. I'm presently enrolled at the University of Montana. I'm now 42 years old. It's my first attempt at college. And a lot of that is aimed at trying to find out who I am and what I am and where I've been for the last 25 years of my life. I hopefully will find a way through that. I do things like this and talk to other people about it in an attempt at self-therapy as much as an attempt to try to tell other people that there's a lot of us out here that need help and that there's nothing wrong with us. We're good people too.
I think it's important that everybody, people who are affected or people who are not, people at large, know as much as they can about disorders, problems that affect our neighbors, our loved ones, and sometimes ourselves. The good news about post-traumatic stress disorder is that it is amenable to treatment, meaning it has a very good high success ratio, particularly if it is treated shortly after the traumatic event. As I said at the beginning, this is not just a soldier's disorder. Soldiers from every war that we've ever had, which means every generation of us have had veterans with this problem, whether it was called that or shell shock or combat neurosis or whatever. But anybody who's been traumatized, anybody who's been physically or emotionally traumatized is very likely to be involved with post-traumatic stress disorder at some level. If a person who has been traumatized, injured, or emotionally scarred in some way has a great deal of support from his family, from his community, his friends, and has an opportunity to speak with professional counselors when necessary, the likelihood that they can fully recover from post-traumatic stress disorder is very good. The longer that one goes without treating the disorder from the trauma, the more likely it is that it'll be a difficult process. For Vietnam veterans and for the Korean War veterans and the World War II veterans that we work with at the Vet Center, that's certainly true. They're dealing with 20 to 40 years of patterns of dysfunctional behavior and thinking and feeling that are hard to overcome. And yet, fortunately, anyone who is highly motivated to do so has a good chance of successfully overcoming their problems with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Peace is such a fragile thing. The moment when the children sing, when people gather just to find that all of us are of one mind. Spend my life inside a cell. I've lived in hell alone, but I won't send my babies off to
Okay, Mr. Johnson, during the past 10 years, we have noticed a certain glamorization to the Vietnam era. As veterans, some of them are offended by this and others aren't. What is your opinion on the certain glamour being placed upon the Vietnam conflict in comparison to the first 5 years after it was over?
I think that there's an ebb and flow of attitudes about every war that we've ever fought. But the Vietnam War is particularly interesting because in the early days of the war, it was very popular. Most people don't remember that both the press and the people were very much behind it, 65, 66. After the war, and in the latter days of the war, it was a very popular war. And for the first couple of years after the war, Vietnam veterans were seen as the villains in almost every TV show and a lot of movies, seen as the bad guys. And we've had several phases since then. We've gone through, I think, recently a period where almost every good guy on TV is a Vietnam vet with flashbacks and other post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, and is seen with a great deal of sympathy. And as you said, a lot of Vietnam veterans don't respond to that very favorably. A lot of them remember the times not too long ago when they were seen as the villain and hated for what they were, and they see whatever praise that may be coming out of that as being a little bit too little and too late. I think some of us are concerned that the glamorization could lead to to another war, to more kids wanting to do their thing like Dad did because it's now romanticized. But I think a lot of Vietnam veterans are trying hard, including these two men, on a regular basis to try to tell young kids the way it was. There is no glamour, there is no glory to war at all.
Okay, Rick, you and Dave, I'd like to ask you a question. As having been diagnosed as having PTSD, which you both have had, in the last, say, 5 years, I think basically beginning with the platoon era of the movies, quote unquote, and suffering from PTSD, did you find this brought a dramatic change, and all of a sudden what was once a sensation of guilt or maybe remorse, then all of a sudden the public looks at it as being a badge of courage, and now valor is all over? Did this, in suffering from PTSD, did this seem to make it worse, better, or how did you feel about that? Dave?
I must admit, I take in all the movies and such videos that I can on the subject for one reason, really. I'm very curious about what the American public is being told and what they're being shown about Vietnam. And it basically disappoints me that a lot of it is falling back into the John Wayne style of romanticizing war, which is absolutely nonsense and absurd. I would say that there are bits and pieces in some of the shows out there that are reality, but as Hollywood always does, a lot of it has to transcend reality in order to be a marketable commodity, and that hasn't changed in a lot of the work that's being done for Vietnam today. as far as what it's done to me personally with my feelings on PTSD and things, it really hasn't affected me as much as it might have, because it's a situation, again, of what Richard said, it's too little too late. People are no longer hurting as deeply as they were a year or two after the war. They're more ready to accept a romantic idea of what we did over there and what the results were of that, and I think that's kind of a shame in a way.
Well, I think there's there's parts of all the movies that I've seen that have been real good. As far as my PTSD, I don't think it's done anything for it. Made it any better or made it any worse.
Okay, question. My father, I'm John Q. Public speaking. My father, he was in the big one, WW2. I had a brother in Korea. My father was wounded severely, spent a year and a half in the hospital. He's led a very productive life. He's now 61 years old, no problems. Why do you guys have PTSD? What is PTSD? Is it something? Are you cracking up? Are you losing it? Dr. Johnson, would you express your...
Well, when I took this job 5 years ago, I sent a copy of the brochure about PTSD and readjustment counseling to my father-in-law, who's a World War II veteran, and to my father, who's also a World War II veteran. My father-in-law, who's a POW in Japan during the war, his response to reading that pamphlet was to go down and join a POW therapy group at the VA hospital in Salt Lake, which mystified my mother-in-law, because she said, well, he was an Air Force officer for 20 years, and he's raised a good family, and he wasn't an alcoholic, and he didn't have a drug problem, and all of a sudden he's going to a therapy group. I don't understand what he has to do therapy about. Talking to him, he said, I've carried some of this stuff with me for 40 years, and I figured it was about time that I dealt with it. So just because someone is productive or appears to be normal, whatever that is, doesn't mean that they're not carrying the scars, the wounds. My father's response was, after reading the pamphlet, was to say, that wasn't just Vietnam, that it was like that. He said it took me years after World War II to readjust to peace and to not living with constant war. And this was a man who was in the military for 35 years, and probably never said that to any of his comrades or any of his buddies in the military, because at that time they didn't know anything about it, and it was unacceptable. There are a lot of World War II vets, a lot of Korean War vets who have carried that stuff with them for years, and finally are coming in and saying, I'm really glad it's okay to talk about these things, because I still have nightmares about it.
Rick, what's your opinion?
Well, I know I've been in a lot of groups here at the Vet Center, and I know that I've been in there with Korean vets, World War II vets, of course a lot of Vietnam vets, but I think by us coming out and being able to talk about this has brought some of them older guys out too. In fact, we just started a group last night that's got a World War II vet in it, and he was in the Philippines when Pearl Harbor got bombed. And he still got a lot of feeling about it.
Good.
You had something you wanted to say about that?
I've had basically the same experiences that Rick has had. I'm fortunate in having a lot of friends from Korea and World War II, ranging from 65 to 79, actually some younger than that, but up to 79. And I have a real good relationship going with them, and they're real honest with me that they suffer from exactly the same problems we suffer with today. It's just that it was totally unacceptable in those days to even discuss it with your own family. And a lot of them have thanked me that our generation has finally stood up, you might say, collectively and said, hey, we're sick and tired of hiding in closets with this. This is reality. This is real life. It's time the rest of our country took some of the responsibility that we've been shouldering all these years and helped us carry this burden.
Okay, Rick, Dave, let's say you're back from Vietnam, everything's exactly as it was, but in your non-professional opinion, we'll exclude Richard from this with his expertise. Let's say a year after your return back to civilian life, what one thing could the government have done, recognizing they were on the borderline of having this problem with post-traumatic stress disorder? What do you feel for yourself personally they could have done that would help maybe lessen the impact of PTSD or eliminate it for you? Dave?
I don't think they could have eliminated it. I think the damage was done in Vietnam and had to be dealt with consequently. I don't think it's possible to eliminate the PTSD concept from combat experience. They go hand in hand. I think our country could have taken a far more active view on the way they handle the situation. I think they should have gone public with the issue that war is a devastating traumatic experience for human beings, period, regardless of sex or age or anything else. And they should have gone actively into the communities and informed the people of what to expect when their children came home and seemed a little strange to them, seemed a little standoffish and didn't want to talk too much. Seemed different. We were different, for God's sake. If the government would have taken it upon themselves to rally community support for our soldiers, knowing that the war was a bad issue at that point in time, although it really wasn't for the early fellows. As it got later, it got to be a real bitter issue here, but still, if the government would have carried an active role in rallying community support for the soldiers that were returning home, I think it would have gone a long way to have alleviated these problems 10 or 15 or 20 years sooner than the solutions are coming now.
So your answer is giving more public awareness to what the Vietnam veteran actually went through in Vietnam would therefore lessen the impact of the war itself. Is that true?
A combination of that and funding needed programs such as the Vet Center, which has proved to be
A whole lot sooner.
certainly not perfect, but a very productive system. And the sooner that would have been implemented, the less years of effect this would have had not only on the veteran community, but on all of the family members that live with us daily, that also share in our PTSD problems. They have to, living with us 24 hours a day. They see what it does to us, and it hurts them as human beings too. They could have alleviated a whole lot of pain in this country by taking a responsible attitude toward something that they knew indeed was a reality.
All right. Right?
I think a lot of the problem was that they waited so long to do what they did, and you know, with the vet centers and what have you. It just seems like if they would have done what they've done sooner, that it might have lessened the effect.
So the Vet Center was the answer. It should have been here 20 years ago.
Should have been here 20 years ago.
I'd like to respond to that also.
Sure.
First of all, we have to remember that the war was over in '73, and the psychological psychiatric profession didn't really come to a point where they were in agreement as to what they were even dealing with professionally until '79, early '80. I guess that's on the one side. We really didn't have an understanding until the late '70s, and so and that was after the war. On the other hand, we have known about the traumatic, psychologically traumatic response to war. After World War II, many of the troops, I'm not sure all of them received this kind of treatment, but many of the troops, when they came back to the United States, were given a period of time in which they were assisted in adjusting to that. I know many of the troops were housed in hotels in Florida, and some of their families were invited there, and were there for I think 6 weeks or 2 months, and were given a time to decompress. And that may not have happened to all troops coming back from World War II, but there was a recognition even then that that these people needed time to decompress and deal with the traumatic events of the war. And even at that, the soonest anybody from World War II, I would guess, came back from the front to civilian life was probably over a period of at least a couple weeks, maybe several months. Vietnam, literally, and it often did happen, guys were in ambushes and firefights on Tuesday, and on Thursday were back home and out of the Army, or Marines, or whatever, with no readjustment assistance at that point. Somebody, you would think, should have said, this probably is not real conducive to these guys adjusting real well. A lot of guys were, you know, you talk about jet lag, and that was, I guess, one of the problems. It was typical to be in country, to be under the stress of combat one day, and 24, 40, I guess about 22 hours later, be back in the States. And in many cases discharged within a day or two. That would make it almost impossible to readjust at that point without some real assistance. And as these gentlemen have mentioned, that didn't come along until 5, 6 years after the war was over.
Okay, divorce. That seems to be a very high occurrence with the Vietnam vet. In your opinion, Dave, you and Rick, if you had sought, or if the government had offered counseling a year after your return from Vietnam, and your spouse had went with you and could sit down and have a conversation typically like we're having right now, do you think you'd still be married?
I don't know, because I don't know if I had recognized the problem back a year after I got out. If I would have known something about it and could have foreseen what was going to happen, I would have taken my wife and gone down to counseling and tried to take care of this. It's real hard to say if I would have still been married or not. Real hard to say.
Dave?
Yeah, I really can't make a very educated guess on that either. I was a real bitter person when I first came home, and frankly wasn't interested in a hell of a lot of anybody's opinions, much less theoretical professionals that had never even been where I'd been or seen what I'd seen. I think it may have made life a little easier for my two wives to understand a little bit more about what was going on with me and why I was the way I was. Even with my wives, I rarely spoke to them, and in a very way was away from them a lot of the time, needing to be alone, not from all people, including my wife, as desperately as I needed a relationship. I learned, one of the survival things I learned in Vietnam was to turn within myself. When I got to the point where I couldn't deal with life, I had to be alone, because that's the way I had dealt with the most difficult periods of my life, and I continued that in my relationships with my wives and left them very much alone.
Richard, with this in light, let's say you have a time machine. You know all you know right now about PTSD. You've been treating it ever since its existence, let's say. So you could turn back the calendar to 1975-76. Rick walks into your office. What would you say to him?
Well, I'd like to go back even before that, if I had the time machine, and convince people that it's absolutely important that if they must send people off to war, then it is their moral responsibility to be extremely supportive of them when they return. I mean, that seems like it should be obvious, but it hasn't been. We send people off to war, and we kind of know what goes on over there, sort of. We tell stories about it anyway. We make movies about it. And they come back, and they're different. And instead of offering them our support, our concern, and assistance, we are frightened by it, I think, and say, well, you know, maybe it's better we just don't talk about this, and give them no place to go. I guess what I would say to them in '75 is what I say to them now, and that is essentially that there is a place, that there are people who want to help, who want to listen and want to help them work through their traumas.
Do you think the treatment would have been any different as treating it in the near aftermath as you would have then, as you waited 15 or 20 years?
Well, I think so. The Vet Center, just in the last year or two, has been requested by the U.S. government to provide readjustment counseling or trauma processing for trauma victims in national traumas. We've been involved in assisting the victims and the emergency personnel involved with airplane crashes, the great earthquake in San Francisco last year, and the hurricane back east last year. We sent teams to all of those and assisted people who were not only victims of those occurrences, but also the emergency folks who dealt with the trauma. And if you do that, the likelihood that they will respond and be able to go on about their lives with minimal dysfunction or impact is very, very high. It's a trauma that can be and needs to be dealt with as soon as possible.
So you think that, in your opinion, that if this had been handled 5 years after the incident, that treatment would have been a lot more responsive?
Certainly. If it had been treated a week after the incident or a month after the incident, it would have been even easier.
Okay, a lot of people today associate PTSD with rape, any kind of a violent act upon them. In Vietnam, this was a year of rape. It was a year of violence. What can you say to people to make them realize that PTSD, as the Vietnam veteran has occurred, is not even close to being what a rape victim or a mugging victim or an accident victim would be suffering? Am I right or wrong to presume it is not the same?
Trauma is trauma. And a person who has, a child who's been abused, a person who's been raped or assaulted, a person who's been in an automobile accident and is severely injured are all subject to severe post-traumatic stress disorder. What I think you're getting at or talking about is the fact that if I was in, say, a very severe automobile accident and broke my back and was in the hospital for months and months, that would be a very traumatic event. Several things would happen, though. First of all, I would get almost immediate support psychologically, emotionally, as well as physically. And people would be helping me, assisting me deal with the trauma. War, on the other hand, as you said, you spend a year dealing with sometimes daily trauma, and in order to do that, you have to convince yourself that you're not being traumatized, that it's okay, you're tough, you can handle this. You spend a year denying the trauma, and if you survive, you get very good at not feeling the trauma. And so even if you come back and immediately get assistance, one of the things you need to deal with is deprogramming that year you've spent telling yourself that you're not feeling anything, that it's okay, that you don't need to deal with this. Something that doesn't normally happen with somebody who's been, say, physically traumatized and immediately gets medical assistance and support after the incident.
Dave, do you agree with that?
Yes, basically. I feel very much like a rape victim in a way. One of the most important things that I've learned about the whole situation is the fact that the average age of a combat soldier in Vietnam ranged between 19 and 20 years old, depending on whose statistics you like. And we know that averaged about 26 in World War II. And we know psychologically nowadays the difference of a 17, 18, 19-year-old mind and its ability to withstand traumatic situations is considerably different than a slightly more mature mind of 26. And I'm constantly reminded of that when I look at my own son, who's now 19. When he was 17, which is the age I was when I went over, and I look at him now at 19, and I think, my God, he doesn't have the tools to deal with what we had to deal with at that age. And it makes me realize why I am the way I am to a great degree. Young children is what I'd like to call 17, 18, and 19-year-olds they don't have the tools yet. They don't have the equipment to be involved in that type of a traumatic situation and come out of it normally. It just can't be done. And I think when I look at my son I don't think I could do that to my son. And if he has to go to war at this age in Saudi Arabia, say, my heart's with all those kids that are over there right now, even though I'm kind of against war. If he has to go, I at least want to be honest with him and upfront enough with him to tell him the realities of what I and my country are asking of him. I don't want to just send him there with nothing but idealism in his brain. I want him to understand that what I have asked him to do may be the most significant event of the rest of his life and may very well affect the rest of his life dramatically in a negative way. I hope that the whole country will get to a point where if they continue to send children to war, the least that they owe them is the honesty to tell them the truth about the possibilities of what they're being asked to do in the name of service to their country.
Right?
I think a big consideration there, like Dave was talking about, is the age that we were when we went over to Vietnam. I was 18 years old when our battery got overrun, and I was 30 years old when I started dealing with it, and there was just a lot of years there that it had a chance to set in. It happened at a very young age. You know, I have a son right now that's 17 years old, and I can't imagine sending him off to war. There's no way, because the kid just isn't ready, just like I wasn't ready.
Okay, the question I asked you a while ago, start with Dave. Dave, you have just gone through one of the most bloodiest conflicts in this country's history. I think Vietnam has been recognized as one of the most high wars of attrition that we've ever fought. You were a Marine, ground pounder, grunt, road ready. You did your job. You went out in the bush, you whooped the dink, you found him, you brought him to justice, or your justice. You're proud of that. I'm sure you would. Okay, as you're coming back now to the world, and money is no object, with what you did, you gave the utmost you had to give for your country. You're going to build a war memorial to Vietnam veterans, or to the Vietnam War. What would you build? After going through what you've gone through since the war, which one's the strongest, your post-war or during war experience to influence your memorial to the Vietnam War?
My during war experiences have no equals. Nothing before or since is even in the same realm of consideration. If I could make a memorial myself, it would be the giant image of a human being that would be hollow inside to signify an empty shell. I don't know if you've ever seen the footage of Dear America letters from Vietnam, but one of those letters in there states a young man is writing home to his mother that he's now an empty shell. And that does a very simplistic job of describing how I know I feel inside. I'm empty, in a very real way. I'm looking for a way to fill the void. And with people like the Vet Center, I hope to find it someday, find a way to become at least partially whole again. But that's really what Vietnam signifies to me, not only for the veterans, but for our whole country. We're just kind of an empty shell over that issue even today. We still haven't healed from that.
Okay, if you could have one line put on this memorial, what would it say? Off the top of your head. What would
Don't
it say?
abandon me.
Very good. Richard, helicopter pilot. I don't think that there's anything more prestigious in the war, as I could see it, than the old egg beater pilots. Now it's your turn. You know what you did in Vietnam. Your attrition ratio was, I understand, 80% when you were shot down in Vietnam, severely burned. injured for life. I think your cause was noble. Your deeds were very honorable. Now you've got to build a memorial. What would it be?
Well, you know, I spent a lot of years thinking about that. I spent the first couple of years in and out of hospitals after coming back. And through the late 60s and the early 70s, I thought a lot about that. And I didn't think much about building memorials, but I really think that the memorial that we have for the Vietnam War, the wall in Washington, D.C., is probably the most eloquent memorial that could ever be built, because irregardless of the right or wrong of any war, irregardless of whether we're the good guys, the bad guys, or indifferent, the bottom line, that's what war is about. It's those that died. And I'm not, I'm opposed to war, but I also believe that there are things worth dying for, still. But the bottom line is, that's what wars are all about, the killing of children, almost. As Dave said, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds. And that wall says it all. I think it's a black, polished wall with just the names of those who died.
What would be your inscription?
Oh, I think it would probably have...
Centered around your experience in your life.
Yeah. I think it would have something to do with, of course I'd have to compress it down to give me time, but it would have something to do with those names and the fact that that those who go away to fight the wars give everything they've got. Sometimes their lives, sometimes their souls, and it damn well better be worth the effort. And I think that's the obligation of the country, to make damn sure that those that died for some kind of sensible reason. Now, you'd have to compress that down into fewer words, or you'd spend too much money on the marble. But I think that's what that wall says to me.
So your memorial would be as it is, just change the inscription a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, Rick. Rick Marine again. Bad from the word go, but he shoots some big guns. If anyone's never heard of artillery or seen it, we can all understand basically what hell from above means. You probably damaged or injured a lot of human beings in your stint in Vietnam. So let's kind of turn it a little bit to that in mind. How would you rate or how would you design your memorial?
Well, I really haven't had that much time to think about it, but I think I'd want a big place, a huge park where we could all be together. And that would be the memorial in Washington, D.C., just like it stands today, with all the names of the guys that died. And it's real hard because there's so many of us to just have one place in the United States, but I think that pretty well does it. I'd like to say that I know there's a lot of guys out there that haven't been into the vet center yet. A lot of guys that are hurting, and a lot of families that are hurting, and a lot of kids and everything else. And I've seen them as we go around to the schools here in town and speak. We've had kids come up to us and talk to us and tell us about Dad and everything. And it's real sad. And I would like to see for all of you that to come into the vet center and talk to some of these guys.
I'd kind of like to carry along with that same theme. I know a lot of veterans that can't find it yet, find a way to get to the vet center, even though they know they're desperately struggling in life. It's a hard thing to regain the confidence in a system that betrayed you at one point in time. But I know without them, I probably wouldn't be here today, and I'd sure like to reach out to any veteran out there that's having a problem and say, hey, take a chance, man. It's been a lot of years. It's time to to stand up again and get back to life as best we can. I love you all. Don't forget each other out there.
I guess I'd like to close by saying that I was one of the fortunate ones. I had to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder as well. I was traumatized. I was horrendously physically traumatized, as well as the emotional stuff. I came back with severe burns, missing some fingers, broke my back in 3 places. I was in and out of the hospital, VA hospitals and military hospitals for several years. And through that, because I had physical wounds, a lot of people saw me, a lot of people found it fairly easy to give me comfort and to let me know that I was welcome back, and that helped a lot in my recovery emotionally from those events. And in that way, I was fortunate. I had physical wounds that I could deal with and people could support me with. The majority of men that came back from Vietnam were fortunate enough not to have physical wounds. Probably the majority of them came back with emotional wounds of some kind, unseen and feared and unfelt many times by their families and friends, and have not been dealt with successfully. In most cases, it's not because people didn't care about them, they just didn't know what to do. And as Dave has said, and as Rick has said, there are people who do know, who've gone through the process of healing themselves, who want to assist. And there are a lot of people, a lot of friends, a lot of families who haven't known in the past who would like to assist now. And I would suggest that anybody who's been traumatized, who emotionally has been affected by that, to seek help. The Vet Center is open and free for all veterans and their families, and would like to help. Thank you.